Hi, welcome to Mood Food with Melissa. I'm Melissa, and I'm so excited to be sharing one of my favorite recipes with you. Today, we're going to be making a ridiculous easy pan-seared duck breast. I think for some reason, duck can be really intimidating for people, so I'm happy to show you guys how easy it is to make this happen at home. First, what we're going to do is we're just going to start with some duck breasts that I've picked up at the butcher. They don't need to be anything special. You just want two separate duck breasts. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to score the meat. And I'm going to pop on some gloves to get that taken care of. So scoring is just a simple way of saying slicing in a fancy pattern. So what we're going to do is start with a really sharp knife. That's going to be essential for this. And we're just going to start gently cutting into the fat of the meat, but not the flesh of the breast itself. And we're going to go in about, I would say, a 1/4 inch kind of sections here. So every 1/4 inch, you're just going to cut into the fat, slicing down to where the meat starts. And that's why having a really sharp knife will be very important for this. If you're using a sharp knife, it'll be very effortless to tell when you're moving through the fat and into the meat itself. So using a sharp knife just keeps this nice and simple. But all you have to do is just go in this diagonal pattern about every 1/4 inch, slicing into the fat. And why we're doing this is scoring it allows the fat to render off more. And I think one of the things that I hear most about why people think they don't like duck is that it's chewy and it's greasy and it's fatty. And those things can definitely be true. However, if you've rendered off your fat properly, it won't be any of those things and it will just be delicious. So scoring is really essential to that process of rendering off the fat. So the more little cuts that we can get in here, that's going to give us a better render, which means crispy skin instead of chewy skin. So I'm just going through the whole thing, doing these little lines. And you're just going to use a gentle touch with this. If you really cut into it like you're trying to chop something, you're going to go right through the meat and you're going to have, which honestly, it's not the end of the world if you do, so don't freak out if that happens. But you do just want to stay in the fat if we can. All right, so this is beautifully scored now, and I've already gone ahead and gotten this duck breast scored as well. And you can see that we have a beautiful separation between the fat and the skin here. And we're going to just get these patted dry because we do want a nice crispy skin, and moisture is the enemy of crisp. So we'll just use a paper towel to pat these dry. And we don't need to go too crazy. We just want to get them pretty dried out so that we don't have a ton of excess moisture. And I'm seeing a little piece here that could use just a little more scoring, so I'm gonna go ahead and take care of that. Okay. And when you do the scoring, it looks, beautiful if you can keep them nice and even, and it will look a little bit better in your finished product, but honestly, we're gonna slice it after we finish cooking it anyway, so you're not going to get the same effect as when it's a whole breast, so don't worry too much about making it look perfect. You just wanna create a lot of space for the fat to render off and giving it as much room to move as possible. So now that we have our duck breasts scored and dried down, we're gonna go ahead and season them with some Duxbury salt. And this is the black garlic Duxbury salt. And I love to use this on duck particularly, well, steak too. Really everything, if I'm being honest. It's a really great, just like extra little element. But the black garlic adds just like a really nice, deep, savory note that I think just pairs beautifully with the flavor of the duck. And it allows us to keep the dish really, really simple, not adding any extra ingredients, while still being able to incorporate a little bit extra flavor in there. So we're going to use about, I would say, close to a tablespoon of salt on each breast, maybe more like 2 teaspoons. Again, just like start conservatively, we can always add. And it's going to be mostly on the skin anyway. So when we're seasoning skin, I really like to almost over season it. I like it to be a little extra salty, extra crispy. And we're gonna keep that seasoning mostly on this side of the duck. And then as I rub it in here, we're going to get some excess salt that's going to come off of this side, and we're going to use that to season the other side. So we're going to heavily season this fatty side, and then we're just gonna kind of minimally season the other side. So So I'm working the salt into all of these little scores that we've created, trying to get that salt all up in there. And the salt is also going to help with the rendering. It's going to help draw some moisture out, and it's going to help us get a nice crispy, crispy skin, which is my favorite part of anything. So I'm just using the bottom of the duck breast, the flesh side, to kind of pick up the extra salt that's here on the cutting board. And that's going to give us the seasoning that we need. You can see that we've got, like I said, heavily seasoned on the fat side, very lightly seasoned on the other side. So now that we have these seasoned, we'll get these into the pan, and I'm going to show you just how truly effortless this dish is. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get our duck breast into the pan. And we're going to start the pan over the highest heat possible, because we want to get it to a nice searing heat in the pan. And how I know it's ready to sear is if you hold your hand just above the pan itself, maybe an inch or so. If you're really feeling the heat off the pan, you can know that it's ready. And you can see we're starting to get a little smoke, so we know it's nice and hot. So what we're going to do is add these skin side down into the pan. And we're going to get a little bit of smoke. We're going to get a little bit of action going on in the pan here. But this is just to get a nice sear going. So as you saw, we got like a lot of smoke action right away. When you're working with different equipment, you're going to get different results, and that's totally okay. Like I'm always saying, it's a conversation with the food. So we had the pan super duper hot. We put the duck breast in, we got a ton of smoke action. So what I did is we successfully got our sear by getting it into that really hot pan, and then I just immediately dropped the temperature down and took the pan off the heat for a moment. And what that did is it allowed me to keep the caramelization that we're going to have here, where we have that beautiful browning, and you're seeing the black, which is actually the black garlic from the salt. So we don't want it to get too much more caramelized too rapidly, because we want to render off all of this fat while it's, we want the caramelization to occur while we're rendering off all of the fat. So I've dropped the temperature down to a very low heat. I'm on a 2 on this stove. But you're basically going to get it to a place where you have just a tiny bit of action going on in the pan. And by action, I mean bubbling. You don't want these to be frying. We're rendering off the fat. We're not frying it. So right now you can hear the sizzling, which is why I just dropped this down again, because we really don't want too much of that. We want this to just basically melt in the pan. And that's really the whole recipe right now, is we're just gonna wait for this fat to melt. The whole technique here is just communicating with the food to make sure that we're getting that crispy sear, and then we're allowing it to render down for that fat to melt and not letting it get too crispy in the meantime. So you're just gonna have to kind of feel through it, but it's very, very easy, I promise. This part, getting it set up, is the hardest part. Once we have it going where we want it to, which is what it's doing right now, we're just gonna hang out and wait for it to finish. It will depend on your duck breast, and it will depend on, a whole variety of different factors, but about 20 minutes or so should give us the results that we're looking for, and we're going to just continue to check in. If we start to see that it's getting overly crisp, we can just kind of adjust, and we're just gonna communicate with our food here. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are having a conversation with our food here. And right now it's telling me that it needs just a little more heat. I think there was a lot of residual heat holding in the pan from that initial sear. So it was still getting that little bit of bubbling and a little more of a frying effect than we were looking for. So I let it go down to 1, to the lowest setting. But then we lost all of the action in the pan. We still wanna see a little bit of life going on. We wanna see some movement in the oil. You'll notice that the fat begins to render off very quickly, but there's going to be a lot more fat that renders off. So you'll see this initial kind of pooling of fat, and in that you want to see just like a little bit of movement in the bubbles. You don't want them to be like rapidly bubbling around it, but you just want there to be some level of movement. That's going to give us the amount of heat that we're looking for without giving it too much of a browning effect in the process. So right now we've just increased our heat a little bit, and we're just gonna continue to let these hang out and see what they need from us. Okay, so our duck breasts have been in the pan for about 15 minutes now, and they're definitely going to need a little bit more time. But we can just talk about kind of where we're at and what we're looking for. So we know that these are rendering the way that we want them to, because I can look I can see that there's a little action in the pan, and I can hear that there's a little action in the pan. We're not getting, it's not really frying in here, because a lot of the fat is going to release out, which is what we're doing with the rendering. And when that happens, if the heat's too high, it'll start to fry the duck in the pan in its own fat. So we don't want the temperature high enough to be frying it, but we do want it high enough to be rendering off the fat. So being able to just see a little bit of bubbling and hear a little bit of bubbling at like a nice relaxed pace is a good indicator that the heat is where we want it to be. And this is a little bit of a slow process. Patience is honestly the biggest technique and skill needed in this recipe. So we're just kind of waiting for more of the fat to render off right now, but we can take a look at where they are at now. We can see you still have that beautiful black garlic showing up, but we have some gorgeous caramelization going on, which is what we want. We want the fat to be melting and then slowly caramelizing that part that we had seared in the beginning. So I think that, and again, this is always going to depend on the duck breast that you're using, how much fat is on it, all of those things. So we're just gonna kind of give these a little more time. I think we may need another like 10 to 15 minutes, but we're just going to play it by ear and see when the duck tells us it's ready. So our duck's been in the pan for just over 30 minutes now, and it's getting to just about where I think we want it to be. What we're looking for this step is about half of the fat rendered off. I like to keep a little bit, you don't want all of the fat rendered off. You want to keep a little bit in there so you get that nice chewiness from the fat without it just being overwhelmingly chewy. So right now we have about half of the fat rendered off. If we're looking at these, you can see that we have like a really nice crisp. We have tons of fat that's rendered off into the pan, but you still have a nice solid layer of fat that's nice and soft underneath that crispy skin that we've developed. So what we're going to do now is just increase the heat a little bit, because now we want to move into kind of frying these a little bit to get that crispy skin going. So we're just going to increase the heat a little bit here. I'm going to move this up from a 2 to a 4, and we're going to see how that behaves, and we'll go from there. So right now the temperature is starting to come up. I'm starting to see some more bubbling. I could definitely hear a bit more bubbling. And so that's a good sign that we're moving from the rendering into frying. So we are getting a good amount of that frying sound, but I think we want to increase the heat a little bit and get a little bit more action going in the pan. So I'm going to increase this up to 5, and we're going to see how this behaves. And immediately we're getting some more rapid bubbling. It's definitely starting to sound a little more active. These are great signs that we're starting to fry. What we want to be careful of at this step is that we don't burn the skin while we're trying to get it nice and crispy. So we have to kind of find that middle ground. It's better to just go low and slow. We can always kind of get a little more color on there if we need to in some other ways, but we don't want to burn it, because once it's burnt, we're done. So low and slow, and we'll get it crispy in time. And also by increasing the temperature at this stage, we're also going to kind of rapidly start rendering off some more fat. So as we're frying it, we're also releasing a little bit more fat, which is why we want to make sure that there's still a good layer there when we move on to this phase, so that we're not just drying everything out when we get to the frying part. Although it would be pretty impossible to dry out duck. It has such a reputation for being greasy, but that's just because if you don't give it a chance to render off a lot of that fat, the fat stays in the duck breast, and then it kind of comes pouring out when you're eating it. So by rendering off a lot of the fat, you still get all of the delicious things about a duck breast, but without that greasy element that I think could be a turnoff for some people. And these are frying up beautifully. You can see we're starting to get some bubbling and glistening on the skin when I remove it from the pan. So that's a good sign that we're frying and no longer just rendering. And as I mentioned, we're going for a nice gentle fry because we don't want to get too much more caramelization, which could turn into a char on the skin. We really just want this to get it nice and crispy for us. In this phase, we don't necessarily have to time either. We can kind of just play it by ear, and we'll know what we're looking for by figuring out when the skin is crispy. I'm gonna go ahead and just use my finger to touch this, but you can use a knife or something that will give you some level of resistance, and you just wanna get, you'll feel when it's hardened versus when it's just kind of rendered off. So these have gone about maybe 5 minutes or so in the pan on this kind of low frying temperature. And what we're going to do now is just increase the temperature a little bit more. We really just want to get it frying. And we can't do that for too long, or like I mentioned, we'll get into that char zone. So what we're also going to do is get the pan really hot, because when we flip this over, we want to get a really nice sear on the flesh side of the breast that we haven't even started cooking yet. So we're going to take the heat from a 5 up to, let's bring it to an 8. And we're gonna see how this behaves. It's not going to need very long at this temperature. We're just trying to get a really nice crispy crust going. And you can see we have a little bit of smoke coming off. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put that down a tiny bit. So now we're at a 7, and we're gonna let this just kind of hang out for just maybe a minute or two. This pan is rapidly heating up, so we actually aren't going to leave it in here too much longer. I think just a minute is going to be perfect on this side. And then, once we have everything looking beautifully crispy, we're just going to go ahead and give it a quick flip. That looks gorgeous. You can see we have these beautiful lines. You can see all the grease bubbling up through the scoring, and that means that we have some great rendering action that we've achieved. And we're just gonna go ahead and cook these through to about 150-ish. Duck, you don't need to cook fully to 165. If you're nervous about foodborne illnesses and all that kind of stuff, go ahead and cook it to 165, it'll still be okay. But you don't have to fully cook this like you would a piece of chicken, which I think also makes it even easier to work with, because you don't have that same anxiety of making sure that it's fully cooked as you would if you were working with chicken or something like that. This is looking great. We're definitely not cooked through yet, but I can tell just, oh, that crispy skin is phenomenal. This is exactly what we are going for. Okay, so I think we're ready to do a little temp check. We can get this checked out here. We're gonna get the tip of the thermometer to the middle of the meat. And right now we're at 135. So we'll just need another couple of minutes here. And you'll notice these duck breasts are about 1/3 of the size that they were when we started cooking them. And most of that is because the fat that has come out of them and into our pan. So that just goes to show, when people think that duck is a very fatty thing, it certainly is, but there are ways to prepare it that make it not so fatty by the time you're enjoying it, and you just get to have the lovely elements of it being fatty and not like the overwhelming chewy parts of it. So these, I think, are gonna be pretty close to where we want them to be. Couple more degrees to go. And you can see we're getting a really nice caramelization on this bottom part. And that's why we needed to make sure that the temperature was up high enough when we did the flip, so that we can get that caramelization, that nice sear, without cooking the duck through too much. The caramelization on the bottom is beautiful. I'm so happy to see it. I'm actually gonna move these around in the pan a little bit, just to kind of pick up a little bit more of that caramelization that's on the bottom of the pan and bring it onto our duck. Oh, beautiful. Give that another temp check. And we are rapidly going up in heat. So we're gonna get those out of the pan and onto our cutting board, and we'll just remove that from the heat. Turn off our stove. Now, obviously we have a lot of duck fat left in this pan. The way that I would choose to dispose of this is to just let it cool. Let it come to room temp, it'll start to solidify, and once it gets into kind of a solid state, it's much easier to clean up. So you can just use a paper towel or something to wipe it into your trash. If it doesn't come to a completely solid state, you can still put it into your trash, but make sure that you have a lot of absorbent materials in there. You definitely don't want this pouring into the bottom of the bag. Definitely make sure it's cool either way. But if you have enough paper towels or just other absorbent things in there, you'll be able to just pour the grease into your trash barrel and it will be okay. But don't put it down your sink. Okay, so our duck is all out of the pan. It's fully cooked and ready for us to enjoy. What I like to do when I serve this is to carve it into very thin little slices. As I mentioned, we're keeping some of the fat on there, and the fat is going to be chewy because that is just the nature of fat, especially in duck. So what I like to do to kind of make that an enjoyable element of the dish and not something that's just chewy and overwhelming is to cut really, really thin slices. That way you're never getting a huge bite of fat, even if you're having, a good amount of fat in your bite. So use a really sharp knife. That's always the best way to get a good cut. And you don't have to be too fancy about it. Sometimes I like to just kind of get it. It's more about the experience, less about how it looks. So what I go for here is those really thin slices. Sometimes they end up almost like shaved, and I think that's okay. Tastes a lot better. It's way more enjoyable than having a big chunk. So if you're not getting like beautiful, fine, tiny slices, don't worry about it. You just want to kind of make it small, and it's going to look really beautiful when we plate it up anyway. So we'll just go in here and we're going to cut these nice, small little slices. You can hear that beautiful crispy skin that I'm cutting through. And the duck is beautifully cooked. I love seeing the scoring. It's so beautiful seeing all of those nice little pockets of crispiness in there. Okay, so we've got that breast carved up. And you can see we're still having plenty of juice. There's plenty of fat coming off. These did not dry out at all, even though we rendered off all of that fat from them. So now I'm going to show you my favorite way to get this plated up. I love to serve this in a bunch of different ways with different sides and sauces, but this combination is by far my favorite. So today I'm going to be plating this with some beautiful honey nut squash that I showed you how to make in one of my previous episodes. This is just honey nut squash that's been roasted, mixed with a little bit of olive oil and sea salt, and just smashed into just a really rustic mash here. You can get fancy with it and do a puree if you like, but there's something about like the rusticness of it. It feels like fall to me. It feels cozier that way. And I think it gives a little more height on the plate, which is really what I'm going for with this plating. So I'm going to give a nice generous scoop here right into the center of the plate. And then I'm just gonna kind of wiggle my spoon so that I can spread it into kind of a little line, but we're not going for any, I don't want it to look too polished. I want it to be like nice and organic looking. So I'm gonna add a little more here and just kind of like heap it in so that we get some texture and some height, but we still want it to be pretty smooth. Great. And so now that we have our squash down, we're just going to add a little bit of this blackberry date sauce, which I also showed you how to make in a previous episode. And what I like to do here is put a little bit of the sauce down right on the squash. And then I'm going to put the duck breast right over that sauce. And that way we'll have the sauce touching the duck, but I'm also going to add the sauce in another way afterwards that won't be touching the duck. So I like to have it on the plate and on the duck itself. All right. Going to go ahead and just gather up our duck here. What I like to do is just kind of keep it in the formation that I had it in when I was working with it on the cutting board. And you can just, so you can use your fingers or you can slide your knife under it here and use that to help transfer it over. And then what you're going to do is just kind of shingle the duck breast so that it is all kind of leaning back, nice and relaxed. And so that you'll be able to see that beautiful crispy skin, but also the inside of the duck as well. So that is beautiful there. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm a big believer that we eat with our eyes first, but we're also not looking for perfection. What our brains are looking for are colors. We want to see beautiful colors because that means diverse nutrients. And that's really what's satisfying us. Not a perfect knife skill, not a perfect plating. So if you have the colors and the flavors and they're there, you're gonna be golden. So we have our duck and our squash and our sauce on the plate, and we're going to finish with some microgreens. And I love microgreens because they're just so nutrient dense. You can get an incredible amount of nutrition from just a little fingerful of greens. It's like eating an entire salad. And especially with this dish, I think it just adds such a beautiful fall element. It just really brings out all of those fall colors. And I'm gonna do a pretty heavy little kind of salad on top here, kind of bury the duck almost. That's a little bit much, so we'll take some off. But we want it to be, I like it to look like really floral almost. So I don't want the duck to be the star of the show here. I want it to be kind of a hidden little treasure underneath those beautiful microgreens. So I think that that's a great amount, and we're just going to go in with a little bit more sauce because, as I have mentioned, I am an extra sauce kind of girl. So I like to have the sauce on the duck underneath it like that I showed you, but I also like to do just a little drizzle around the plate. And this part also, it doesn't have to be exact. It's just to get some beautiful colors in there, and that looks gorgeous. So this is pretty much good to go, but I'm going to finish it with just one more little pinch of salt, because salt, when it's in something, when it's cooked into it versus finished on it, it's a different flavor. And especially when you're doing a really fatty or crispy thing, I think a little finished salt goes a long way. So we're gonna just do a teeny little pinch of salt kind of over the whole dish, and we are good to go. So now you have a beautiful new dish to add to your repertoire and impress your guests anytime you entertain. It's one of my favorite recipes to make when I entertain because duck sounds so impressive. People are always, they're in awe of it and it sounds so special. But really, it's really, really easy. As you saw, patience is the biggest skill that we need for this. A little bit of checking in, a little bit of talking to our food, but it's mostly about just getting that beautiful score going and then letting it spend as much time as it needs in that pan. And of course, getting that nice little finish on it. But it's so easy. And so if you're going to do this, if you were to cook at home and you were like making dinner for your family or something immediate, you could cook it the way that we did it here. And if you were going to serve this dish for a dinner party or something like that, where you might not want to be cooking immediately before serving, what you can do is essentially go through 90% of our recipe, but instead of finishing the duck up to the proper temperature in the pan, you're just gonna flip it over, give it a very quick sear to sear the meat, seal it in, and then you'll transfer everything over to a baking sheet. And then you can bake the baking sheet, I would do it very hot, so like 500 degrees in the oven very quick, just to bring it up to that internal temperature that you need before serving. And that's a really good way to get multiple duck breasts all to the same temperature at the same time. So you can do all of this low and slow communication with the food before your guests are there. And then when they arrive, all you'll have to do is plate this beautiful dish for them. So I really hope that you'll enjoy making this dish at home, and you can find this recipe and more at moodfoodwithmelissa.com.